Hey, did you talk about sticks? Can you imagine? He goes, there's two missing, I know. I come here every day and I check.
1 week ago, the city of Atlanta and all throughout metro Atlanta was rocked by the latest mass shooting, claiming the life of one person and injuring 4 others. And we continue to feel the repercussions from the incident 1 week ago. I'm Tim Darnell, broadcasting from our Midtown Atlanta studios here in Atlanta News First, and welcome to this week's edition of Political Update. We're joined at the state capitol by our outstanding political reporter, Doug Reardon. And Doug, there was an event earlier today where several state Democratic lawmakers are calling on Governor Kemp to convene a special legislative session to address the issue of gun violence, not only here in Metro Atlanta and Georgia, but also the nation. Tell us a little bit about what has happened earlier today.
Right, good afternoon, Tim. That's exactly what Democrats were calling for, is a special legislative session to go back and re-examine some of the gun control measures that simply never got the attention that they feel they should have this legislative session. They were joined today inside the Capitol on the steps there in the rotunda by advocates, students, doctors, even some actual victims of gun violence, to call on the governor, who's the only one that can call a special legislative session and get lawmakers back here to Atlanta to do that, to address some of these measures in the wake of that Midtown doctor's office shooting that, as you mentioned, left 1 person dead and 4 others hurt. Some of their priorities on their wish list for gun control: background checks, red flag laws that would allow judges and police to take guns away from people who are exhibiting signs that they may hurt themselves or others. They also want safe storage laws, which is something that other states led by Republicans in both their legislatures and in their governor's offices have done already. One lawmaker today who spoke noted Tennessee just recently did that. So again, only the governor can convene a special session of the legislature, and it unfortunately for Democrats does not appear that that will be the case, that he will actually go ahead and do that. This was more of a symbolic call today, 1 week to the day after that shooting in Midtown, to call for more measures. But we reached out to the governor's office today to ask what the possibility was of this actually happening. They had no comment for us and said the governor had a very busy schedule and could not speak to us directly today. But just a couple of statistics that were noted today that we fact-checked. Georgia ranks 8th nationwide in instances of violent gun crimes. Guns are also, as they are in many states, the #1 killer of children and teens here in Georgia. And every 10 hours, a Georgian takes their life by suicide with a firearm. And so this was obviously something that Democrats, in the wake of that Midtown shooting, really wanted to get across to the public. Again, there were even some Republican voters that we spoke to here today that were coming out to advocate for some of these common sense gun measures. We're going to hear from them today, coming up at our 4 and 6 o'clock hours on Atlanta News First on air. But, again, this is something that poll numbers have consistently shown Americans want in terms of background checks, in terms of safe storage, in terms of red flag laws. And so, it may not happen before the convening of next legislative session, but you can bet, and Democrats made it very clear today that this was going to be a priority for them, if not during a special session sometime during the next General Assembly session here in just under a year. And so, again, we'll keep an eye on this throughout the afternoon and throughout the week to see if a special session is something that may actually happen. I don't think the chances are great. Democrats are very hopeful that it will happen, but we will continue to reach out to the governor's office to see what the possibility of this might be, and to see if there are any measures on his radar that could possibly factor into this ask by Democrats for more gun control measures. But Tim, I know you spoke again to a lawmaker who was very passionate about this just before this meeting here today at the Capitol.
And Doug, we'll look forward to your reports later on Atlanta News First during the 4 and 6 p.m. newscast this afternoon. Earlier today, I conducted an interview with one of those Democratic lawmakers who is calling on Governor Kemp to convene a special legislative session, and we talked specifically about what Doug was just mentioning in terms of the actual likelihood of a Republican governor calling a special legislative session to deal with gun violence and mass shooting. Here's that interview we conducted earlier today with State Senator Nabilah Islam, a Democrat from Lawrenceville. State Senator Nabilah Islam, a Democrat from Lawrenceville, is one of several Democratic state lawmakers who on Wednesday and prior have been calling for a special legislative session to be called by Governor Brian Kemp to address the issue of mass shootings and gun violence. And we're joined by the senator herself. Tell us, first of all, how this effort and how this request has come about.
Well, I know that for a very long time, Georgians have really wanted to make sure that we implement laws that keep our communities safe from gun violence. And what we saw last week with 2 mass shootings back to back, one on Wednesday in Atlanta where one woman's life was claimed, several others were injured, and then the next day in Moultrie, Georgia, we had 4 more people killed. I myself was on lockdown with several thousands of people in that Atlanta shooting while there was a 5 to 7 hour manhunt looking for the person that had, that shot those people. And so we shouldn't have to live this way. We are terrified to, go to drop our kids off to school. Folks are scared to go to church. Folks are scared to, go to the grocery store. We just don't know if we're going to be next. And there are ways that we can change the trajectory of gun violence in this country, in this state, and it's by passing gun safety laws. And so what I learned was that the governor has the power to call a special session specifically to address firearm-related public safety. And that's why I asked the governor on Monday to call that special session, because we need action now.
Well, what are the options? What are the chances of him actually doing this? I mean, could this not simply be considered a publicity stunt on behalf of Georgia Democrats who really are in the minority here in Georgia? What are the chances of Governor Kemp and Republican leadership actually heeding this call?
I think there's a great chance. Look, the governor has talked about how he cares about public safety, and they've been passing laws that I don't necessarily agree with to bring crime down. Well, this is another way to address crime, is making sure that we pass gun safety laws to reduce the gun violence that we have in our communities. Look around the South. We have Texas and Florida that have passed safe storage laws for guns. Let's look at Tennessee, where the governor, after their heartless mass shooting that they had earlier, he had an executive order to tighten background checks, and he's asking the legislature to pass a red flag law. I mean, look at Texas. Just recently, in this week, that they had a committee where they raised the age from 18 to 21 to be able to purchase a firearm. And then let's look at Georgia. Representative Michelle Au got a hearing on her Safe Storage Act legislation, the first hearing that we've had on gun safety legislation in the state of Georgia in about a decade. So that was via a Republican chairman. So there is an appetite for this type of legislation, for gun safety legislation. And just recently, Fox News itself released a poll showing that the legislation that Democrats introduced this session are overwhelmingly popular with the American population. So I think this is feasible. I think this is something that can be done. I think this is also things that are very popular with Georgians. And look, at the end of the day, we want to keep our families safe. We want to keep our kids safe. We want to be able to go to school, church, and work without feeling like, some active shooter is going to gun us down.
Is it your position that last week's Midtown Atlanta shooting would not have happened if Georgia had stricter gun control or gun control laws? Is that your position?
I feel like if we had stronger gun safety laws, it would dramatically decrease the gun violence we have in our communities. If we had a red flag law in place, we could have, their family could have petitioned a judge to take away the firearm from that individual. We don't have all the details from that mass shooting from last week, but what it does seem like is that that gentleman did have mental health issues. And so that, making sure we have universal background checks. I mean, these are laws that could have prevented what happened last Wednesday, and I know would prevent further mass shootings from happening as well.
Do you support stronger efforts for mental health evaluation? It seems like on both sides of the issue, we have folks who are more conservative, who believe in the absolute right to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment of the Constitution. On the other side of the issue, there are individuals who believe that we should have stronger gun control laws and stricter regulations. Somewhere in the middle, is there any area for common ground, such as support for stronger mental health efforts and support for at-risk individuals in minority community? Is there any area where both sides can meet in the middle and achieve some kind of common ground?
Yes, it doesn't have to be either or though. In order for this to be effective, we need comprehensive gun safety legislation passed. And that includes, as I mentioned, universal background checks, that includes safe storage laws, that includes red flag laws, among many others, as well as strengthening our mental health care system and making sure that individuals that need health care are able to access it. Speaker Ralston was a champion for mental health, and the first part of our mental health reform came about last cycle, and this time around there was another piece of mental health legislation that would have increased access for people to be able to get the health care that they needed, but unfortunately it did not pass this past session. Hopefully we can bring it up next year. But I think there is an opportunity here that Georgians, I think, definitely agree that we need to strengthen the ability for people to access mental health care, and also that we all want to make sure that dangerous people and people with mental health problems don't have access to firearms.
We are wrapping up this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First from our Midtown Atlanta studios with State Senator Nabilah Islam, Democratic lawmaker from Lawrenceville, who is one of several Democratic lawmakers calling on Governor Brian Kemp to convene a special session to address the recent and seemingly never-ending spate of mass shootings, not only here in Atlanta, but across the nation. Senator, I'll give you the final few minutes. Anything you'd like to leave our viewers and listeners with?
This can be done. This is not far-fetched. This is something that is happening across the South. There is an appetite for gun safety legislation to be passed in the Georgia State Legislature with Republicans, and this should be a bipartisan effort. I know it can be done. We just need to have the moral courage to pass this legislation, and Georgians deserve it, and they need it, and our communities deserve to be safe. So I'm urgently waiting to, I'm waiting to see if the governor will respond to our calls for a special session. We have not heard anything yet, but we are patiently waiting.
Well, if that's an issue we will continue to follow. Thanks to Senator Nabilah Islam, State Senator from Lawrenceville, a Democrat. Thanks for all of you for watching this edition of Political Update here on Atlanta News First.